The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. Joining me now, freshman Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. You know, Rand is on the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, and the Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. You know, it sounds like we got way too many committees there in the Senate if Rand himself is on 4 of them. He's also the author of the just-released book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington. So that's a book that I would recommend. I haven't even been able to read it myself, but I'm sure it's a good book if Rand had anything to do with writing it. And, you know, he made records, history, because Rand and Ron, they're the only father-son congressional Senate combination in U.S. history. Now, I'm not sure if maybe there's been a father-son that have both been in the Congress. I'm not sure, but I know there hasn't been a situation where we've had a father and son in the Senate and the House. You know, I'd rather like to see, we really need to get Rand's father, Ron, need to get him out of the House and put him into the White House, because that would be a combination that would be a lot more powerful, having a President, Ron Paul, and a Senator, Rand Paul. Anyway, Rand, are you there?
Good morning, Peter. Good to be with you.
Thanks for coming on the show. I had, one of your colleagues on from the House of Representatives on earlier, a good guy by the name of Louis Gohmert. And, before he came on, I was playing some clips from a Democratic congressman who was making the argument, the rather foolish argument, that we can't afford to cut government spending. That if we cut government spending, we'll derail the economy and we'll destroy jobs because we'll be taking money away from the public sector. But for some reason, they don't think taking money out of the private sector destroys any jobs.
Yeah, it sounds like a foolish old Lord Maynard Keynes type of idea to me. But I think the best way to put it in perspective when people say government, can create jobs is we spent $1 trillion on a stimulus package, and if you divide it out by jobs created, it was $430,000 per job. My guess is that nobody actually got $430,000 for their job, but it just shows how inefficient government is. And then the next question I always try to tell people is that when government creates a job, you get the job created and it goes to political cronies who give you a lot of money. When the marketplace creates a job, it's democratic capitalism. You vote every day at Walmart with your dollars, or Kmart, or Kroger, and you get to decide who is successful and where the jobs are created, instead of having political cronyism that goes on in Washington decide which jobs would be created.
Oh, sure. When the private sector creates jobs, that means that the companies are providing goods and services that people actually want, because they're willing to exchange their labor, the money, the wages that they earn from working, for these products. But government creates jobs, they might be providing a service that nobody wants, but you're forced to accept it at gunpoint.
And it's a good example of it is sort of in the energy sector. The people that are elected now, President Obama and his team, believe that we should have windmills, but windmills create energy at 1/55th the efficiency of coal. So it costs 55 times more to get a kilowatt of energy out of a windmill than it does out of burning coal. And so they do something the marketplace would never do, and that's to choose the most expensive form of energy.
Absolutely. If windmills were capable of producing energy efficient, economically efficient energy, and there was a demand for it, the government wouldn't have to mandate it. It would happen all by itself. The fact that it's not happening means it's not viable. And if the government
and then throw into the mix that when government chooses and does jobs, they usually require that union labor or prevailing union wage be paid. So everybody knows this in their local community. Schools cost about 20 to 30% more because they pay a higher union wage. We do it for airports. We do it for all kinds of government projects. And really, it's a wasteful use of money, and it goes to a very select, politically connected few in the unions.
Can you imagine how much it's going to cost to build out this high-speed rail network that the president wants to build without really utilizing any of the manufacturers that are currently making these things offshore, trying to do it all with unionized U.S. labor? The trains are going to be so expensive, nobody could ever afford to ride them without a huge government subsidy.
Yeah, I just saw the premiere of Atlas Shrugged, and in the movie, they recount where she builds the brand new track out in Denver, and she has a new Reardon metal that they're going to use, this high tension steel. And the unions say, oh, they won't go on it. The union engineers are not going to drive the trains. And that's how politics get involved in all of this. And because the unions can then drive things not on economics, but on who they like or dislike politically.
How was the movie? I mean, was it any good? What did you think?
It was good. I saw it. I had to leave because I was going to give another speech, but I saw 3/4 of it. And it's going to be in 3 different installments. I met the producer. And, I think it's pretty exciting for so many years having it not come out, that it's finally come out. And who knows, it's done as an independent film, that maybe it could catch on and get wider distribution.
Yeah. Did you like the Gregory Peck Fountainhead movie?
I think the Fountainhead, if I were a movie executive, I would buy the rights to that and redo it. It wasn't... I think it was okay maybe for its time when it was done, but I think it could be done much better. Oh, no,
it wasn't Gregory. No, it was, what was his name? It was the guy from Sergeant York. Who was the guy that played him?
I thought it was Gregory Peck.
No, it wasn't. It was, why am I blanking on him? He was the guy, he was in Sergeant York.
But anyway, the Fountainhead wasn't too bad, but I think the Fountainhead could be redone a lot better.
It was an excellent book. But anyway, let me go to something that's a little bit more practical, because we have this, the House tried to pass, $80 billion worth of cuts, and the House Republicans said that's too draconian. All they were willing to do was like $60 billion in cuts. And then yesterday, President Obama actually said, well, even if we pass those cuts, it won't even make a dent in the deficit. Yet he's trying to champion what he's doing as being fiscally responsible when he wants to cut even less than the House Republicans. You propose to cut $500 billion in real cuts coming out of this year's budget?
Yeah, out of 2011, immediately do that. And then we have a 5-year plan that we're going to be releasing either this week or next week to balance the budget over 5 years.
And what has been the reaction? How many senators are on board with you in making actual cuts?
We have 0 right now, but some are starting to talk to us. The main thing that prevents some Republicans from joining us is that we make the point over and over again that you cannot balance the budget without looking at the entire length, width, and breadth of the budget. You have to look at military spending. You cannot just look at non-military discretionary spending. In fact, if you eliminate non-military discretionary spending, you still don't balance the budget. Mm-hmm. So our $500 billion in cuts includes almost $100 billion in military cuts. It's really still only about a 3% cut. Or no, actually, it's a 6% cut from 2010. But if you don't do that, I don't think you're really serious about being fiscally responsible.
Well, absolutely. I remember it was Gary Cooper who played.
That's it. You're right.
But what can we do now? I mean, I know that we've got this the deficit ceiling vote coming up. And I know that, I mentioned when I was running for U.S. Senate, the main thing I wanted to do is I wanted to be the guy that would lead the filibuster and not let that debt ceiling be increased. Is there any chance that Rand Paul can do that, can draw a line in the sand and say no more spending, the buck stops right now?
Well, basically, we've been saying that, I can't imagine voting to raise it unless we got significant budgetary reform. I'm not going to vote to raise it just on the promise of even $50 or $60 billion in cuts, because, interestingly, if you cut $60 billion, you take the deficit from 1.65 to 1.59. It really is insignificant. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It just shows how big the problem is.
Absolutely. Don't go away. We got a lot more coming up with Peter Schiff and Rand Paul after this break. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Welcome back, everybody. You are listening to The Peter Schiff Show with Senator Rand Paul. And, Senator, let me throw something out there for you. I think that the U.S. economy really, we're basically on our deathbed here. I think within your term, your 6-year term in the U.S. Senate, we will have a major currency crisis, a sovereign credit crisis, and probably in the first half of your 6-year term, not in the back half. We need major surgery, radical surgery on this budget. Why not just draw a line in the sand, seize the opportunity, make the debt ceiling a real ceiling, and force the spending cuts right now? this year. Make them do it. Don't agree to increase the debt ceiling on any terms. Just say that's the ceiling. We can't borrow any more money, so force them to cut.
Well, I think you're right. The only question is whether or not there's enough votes to even force the cuts, because basically there may well be enough votes to overcome a filibuster as well. I think the Republican caucus is somewhat unified in getting something. They want to use this as leverage to get some kind of spending cuts. The question will be, will it be enough to get all of us on board? It would take quite a bit to get me on board. In fact, I'm not sure that we'll get there. If we passed an ironclad balanced budget amendment to the Constitution in advance of the debt ceiling is about what it would take for me to vote for this.
Yeah, but we don't even have time for that. By the time they get that ratified and passed, the crisis will have happened. That's just kicking the can down the road. We want to balance the budget right now. We don't have any more time.
I agree.
And
I agree. And that's why we're also introducing significant budgetary cuts. The thing about the leverage of the debt ceiling, though, is to have the leverage and use it for good. You have to have the leadership of the House and the Senate on board, and that may well be the problem. Is that in the House, many in the Republican leadership have already said, "Oh, we have to raise the debt ceiling."
No,
so
we don't.
I know, I agree with you, but they've already sort of capitulated in advance. Your leverage is by saying you won't vote to raise the debt ceiling unless we get this. And I'm not sure that the willpower and the unification of the leadership is such that it's going to work that way. That's the way I would like it to work.
But the problem, Rand, is if we get a little meaningless victory, if we get them, we say, okay, we raise the debt ceiling and we get some trivial amount of cuts that doesn't head off the financial disaster that's coming, we win nothing. If we're going to go down swinging. Let's stand for something and challenge the senators. You have the power of that Senate, of the filibuster. You can talk. You've got the truth on your side. You've got knowledge on your side. Let people know how high the stakes are. Let people know that we can't go on like this. This is not a problem for our grandchildren and our children. We're going to deal with it right now. In this decade, this currency is going to collapse. Our whole phony economy is going to come tumbling down. We're going to wipe out the middle class. We're going to destroy the dollar unless the people in the Senate stand up now and do something to avert a crisis for a change.
I agree with you, and there have been some good proposals that allow us to continue to argue this way, particularly that Pat Toomey has a proposal saying that basically the Treasury should just simply pay the interest on the debt out of revenue. There's plenty of revenue to never default on our debt. It's sort of a straw man argument the other side is bringing up, saying, oh, you have to do this or financial Armageddon happens. I'm kind of with you. If we do nothing and we continue along this course, there may well be an Armageddon we face, or a debt crisis or a currency crisis sometime in the next few years. So, yeah, I agree with you completely. We do have to make a stand, and there will be those of us who will. I'm just not sure we have necessarily the votes to force them to come our way, but we're trying every day. Every day we make proposals to bring them in the right direction. We'll be coming out in the next week with Social Security reform. We'll be coming out with a balanced budget that balances within 5 years, that has significant cuts every year.
Two things I want to ask you. Well, first, on the debt ceiling, yes, right now we're talking about a debt ceiling that we self-impose. But eventually there will be a debt ceiling that we can't raise because it's going to be imposed by the creditors who don't want to lend. And if the world doesn't want to lend, then there's nothing left. All we've got is the Fed. And when that's all we've got, when the only buyer of our debt is the Federal Reserve, that's when the crisis comes. But you mentioned Social Security reform. I want to ask you, in all honesty, is there any way to reform a Ponzi scheme to make it work?
Well, you can make it more solvent basically by changing and tweaking the rules of eligibility, the age of eligibility,
but can you
etc.
But you mean less insolvent? I mean, I had a trustee from the Social Security system on my radio show, and I asked him if he can tell me the difference between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme, and he couldn't think of anything. So if you're talking about is it possible for the government to make a Ponzi scheme work?
You can make a bad system less bad, and I think that's basically where we are. We talked about, and there's still many of us who believe in privatization or individual accounts, trying to transition away from a government program towards a program that would actually have individual ownership of accounts.
Right. I mean,
but the problem is that the willpower and the votes are not there yet. It doesn't mean that we're not going to still promote these things, but the one thing we could possibly get enough votes for is to say that we're not going to continue to allow a system that is very top-heavy, drag us all down under the weight of debt that they will have to borrow to pay for future recipients. And you can tweak it. You can raise the age. You can have means testing that will apply to the cost of living increases, and you can actually get to a point where it doesn't leak out more money than it brings in.
But it has to, because what happens in a Ponzi scheme is the only way it's viable is the people who got in early, who got into Social Security a long time ago when the taxes were very low. They paid in a little bit, and they get a windfall, and all that is possible by all the people who come later in the game who pay huge amounts of taxes and get very little back. And that's what's happening right now with the younger generations that are certainly our age and younger. They are getting a rotten deal. They are having all of their earnings taxed from them and given to older people. And the hope is that somehow, some miracle, just like Bernie Madoff was waiting for a miracle, that there's going to be this new generation of people. Maybe they're going to come from outer space and land in America that are going to pay all the Social Security taxes that are necessary so that the Ponzi scheme can go on for another couple of generations. I don't want to put my faith in a miracle. I want to act on the fact that this whole thing is insolvent, and let's try to find a reform that acknowledges that it was a scam from day one. It doesn't work. We never should have started it. But yes, now we have a problem where a bunch of people depend on Social Security who would be self-sufficient had the government never erected this gigantic Ponzi scheme in the first place.
Right. And I think the young people, if just the people under age 50 were voting, you might be able to sell, a privatization plan. And everywhere I go, the young people would like to opt out. The young sporters come up all the time, and they would love to opt out and just save their money privately. The problem is, we had that presented a few years ago, and we got nowhere. Now, it may have been in the presentation, but we also had some difficult years in the stock market.
The problem is,
back on us
running out of time. But the problem is, Rand, the people who are going to get hurt the most if we continue this are the elderly on Social Security, because in order to pay the benefits, we're going to have to print all the money, and it's going to be worthless, and they're going to get wiped out, and the young people can leave. They can go to another country and seek out their fortune. The old people are going to be stuck here with worthless Social Security checks. Anyway, thanks for coming on the show. Good luck in the Senate, and good luck with your new book.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter.
Don't go away. We have another half hour of the Peter Schiff Show coming up. I'll be taking your calls, I promise.